Hello, welcome to Chapter 3 Podcast, the show for readers of science fiction, fantasy, and romance. This is Season 2, Episode 2. In today's episode, Liene and I will be discussing the notorious horror novel House of Leaves by Mark C. Danielewski. Should be an interesting conversation. If you guys enjoy the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you take a moment to rate and review us so we can continue to reach more listeners. And if you're interested in getting early access to episodes, as well as exclusive bonus content for every episode, consider supporting us on Patreon. Huge thanks to all of our supporting patrons, including our world-expanding patron Trina. You all make this possible. Liana, we have read House of Leaves. This thing is...
yeah, here's the proof.
It is a tome. And I mean, I know you can't see it if you're just listening, but like the amount of tabs and annotations I have in this, I am not normally a person who does tab or annotate books when I read, but in this case I did. A lot.
I don't tab or annotate books when I read, and I continue to not do that with House of Leaves.
Fair enough. So, okay, I don't know where to start with this. This book is a lot. We should start with kind of what it is for anyone who hasn't read it. Heads up for people listening, there are going to be spoilers, although I'll be honest with you, I feel like even if you have spoilers, this book is so much about the experience of reading it. I'm not sure it matters. I mean...
Yeah, I would second that. Well, okay. Also insofar as spoilers tend to be a plot event, right? That's what is considered a spoiler. And basically the plot events, without being too specific, are known to you kind of at the outset.
Yeah.
That, like not... I mean, most of the specifics keep getting teased, but like you have a kind of sense about what this is going to be about when you go into it. So...
Yeah, I agree. A lot of it is the puzzle box of it and like the formatting and the
formatting, capital T, capital F.
It is a trip. Okay, do you want to try to like, in a nutshell, what is this book about?
Well, so I mean, even though I just said you kind of know going into it, I knew almost nothing going into it because I didn't pick this up having heard of it. I picked this up because my patrons picked it for me, and I literally had never heard of the name of House of Leaves. So it wasn't like I had heard it discussed. I knew nothing. Okay. And so, I mean, I knew when I opened it, I was like, what in the what is this? But so I knew nothing. And so then I was like, as I was going, trying to piece together, okay, so what is going on here? So I kind of had to do that for myself. So I think I'm equipped to do it for other people now. So essentially, because it's layer after layer after layer. It's like Inception. It's like Bookception. Yeah. So at the juicy nugget in the center of this section is
nested
that
storytelling is like
so nested. Yes. But so at the center of this is a real, maybe not real, but a sort of home movie Blair Witch Project type film that this book flip-flops on whether or not that really existed.
Yeah.
But so there is this film supposedly. And this film was a guy moving into this house and documenting the process of moving into this house and videotaping all of it. And then something going wildly wrong with this house and him again documenting all of that. And so then again, the book flip-flops on whether or not any of this is legit. But then there's this film, and then there has been supposedly a great deal of scholarship done related to this film, academic theory about this film. So that's the very center. And so then the first layer of the storytelling is supposedly a guy, Zappano, piecing together this narrative about the making of this film and referencing all of those sources from academia. And then the third layer is somebody who found Zappano's work and is now annotating it himself with his own commentary about what Zappano did. And there's a fourth layer, which is the editors, and they are commenting upon the commenting about this film that supposedly did exist, depending on whose footnotes you read. Some footnotes are like, this is BS, and some footnotes are from Zappano being like, this is all real. So,
right. Yes. I mean, and then there's the appendices, which are...
exhibits.
Well, and I think the other piece of this too is that there are certain things in the book that draw on the real world. And then I didn't expect this, but like sometimes acknowledge in the text that they're drawing on the real world. So it's very trippy. The formatting is weird because it's so the deal with the house is there's sort of like endless hallways where there shouldn't be. It's bigger inside than outside, and there's like a labyrinth built into it that I think is maybe supposed to be like we can get into what it is. Where was I going with this when I started? This is the problem with this book. It's so easy to lose my train of thought because there's just so many things.
I mean, stream of consciousness is kind of a feature, not a bug of this book. So
it's true. It's very true.
You're just being very Johnny structure. Right now.
I am. It's true. No, I was going to talk about the structure of the book. So the book mirrors this labyrinth at times, not just with all of the footnotes, but with the way that the words are sometimes set up on the page, the way that the footnotes are set up on the page. So you'll have like a footnote that is upside down or backwards, or you have to read it in a mirror, or it goes around in circles, or it's like shaped like a ladder, or all of these different things. Different fonts are used for different people, and which fonts are used has meaning. There's a lot. So this book is like a puzzle within a puzzle within a puzzle. It may or may not mean anything.
Yeah, I mean, well, the only thing that it will ever mean is like what the author himself decided it might mean. So like in terms of looking for deeper meaning, it's as deep as the author wanted to make it.
Maybe, or it's as deep as
do you believe
the reader makes really it.
Okay, that's what I mean.
There are people, okay, but there are people who are. There's people who like genuinely think this is a real thing.
Oh God.
So, I mean, there's rabbit holes.
I mean, like, do they believe that Stephen King and Anne Rice really said what they said about the Davidson record?
Who knows? Maybe. I mean, people believe all kinds of things these days, Liana. This
True.
is by far not the weirdest. So one thing that I found, because when I read this book, I went kind of hardcore with it.
You did.
Researching stuff. I did. I have, for anybody who's interested, because we're not going to get into all of this here, but like, if anyone who's interested in seeing a deep dive, I do have a vlog on my main channel that's like an hour and a half long, where I get into a lot of the stuff. But one thing I didn't say in the vlog that I will say here, that I noticed at the end of the book in one of the exhibits that's kind of interesting. Okay, let me find it.
Well, so then did you look at the exhibits as you went or only at the end?
It varied. Like if something was noted in the footnotes, I would read it. And then, but some stuff I read at the end. One thing that I noticed that I thought was interesting, because I am so extra, I like did so much work on this, like breaking codes and figuring out translations of things. I mean, like, look. Your face.
I mean, on principle, the contrarian in me absolutely refuses to do any outside research on this book, because I'm like, sir, if that is what is required for this book, I refuse.
I mean, honestly, that is kind of what's required for it. And so, like, if you don't like that, you're not. Yeah, I mean, you could read it without it, but like,
I'm not the kind of person that will ever be super keen on that. But like, if it's a case where there is added enjoyment from doing that, I'm like, well, I might dip into that. But if it's like the only way to enjoy something, I'm like, absolutely not. I refuse.
Oh man, I like this kind of stuff, so I kind of did this anyway. So page 550, which is, there's like photographs of stuff. There is a quote that is Latin, and it's translated to something along the lines of "change the name and the joke's on you," or "the story's about you." And like, based on the context when I Googled this, because it's a phrase used by some authors, like, you could interpret that as the author sort of saying, like, this whole thing is a joke that's just about the reader.
Well, I mean, I guess like there's so many different, responses to this book, and it's polarizing. I think that's fair to say. Yeah, because it's so out there. I mean, say one thing for House of Leaves. Say it leans into being whatever the F it is.
100%.
Surprisingly, I'm in the middle on this. I'm usually the kind of person that feels very strongly about things, but I feel like I think there's an argument to be made for brilliance and an argument to be made for smug, self-satisfied, masturbatoriness. Because I think there's a bit of both. Because I think to write this there you have to be quite dedicated and quite intelligent to do this. But I also think there is a part of it that's like, because people are like, he just did it for the love of it. And I'm like, I mean, he kind of did it to show off. Like there's some of that where I'm like,
Oh yeah. I mean, it's incredibly pretentious. It does not try at all to make itself accessible to the average reader, whatever that means. No, I agree. I mean, and that's not all a bad thing. I mean, I like that sort of thing and enjoyed it. But if that is a criticism people have, that it's pretentious, that's completely valid.
So interestingly, I mean, I feel like I have probably incorrectly used the word pretension. But anyway, I saw somebody slayed for using the word pretentious in relation to this book, because I didn't do any diving into the actual content of the book. I certainly looked up reviews after. I was like, so what are people saying about this? So I saw, a review that was saying, oh, 1 star, this was so pretentious, blah, 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 blah. And I didn't entirely agree with that review, but I was like, I mean, to a degree. And then a big fan attacked, but also that big fan, I was like, oh, that's actually an interesting distinction that for future reference for myself, just outside of the context of House of Leaves, I want to note for myself that pretension essentially doesn't mean that something is highly academic or difficult to understand. Pretentious means that it aspires to be that, but is ultimately empty, that it is a facade and has no basis for it. So like it is putting on airs, but unjustifiably. So if someone's accusing House of Leaves of doing that, I mean, insofar as this is all fiction, then I would say it's pretentious. But insofar as he did actually, like, there's a lot of, you have to be pretty smart and pretty well read to put this thing together. So in that sense, I don't think it's fair necessarily, if we're using like the correct definition of pretension, to give it that label, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I have mixed feelings on it, because I think on the one hand, I see an argument for what you're saying, but at the same time, the fact that the book is so open-ended, doesn't give you clear answers, and does it intentionally, and intentionally gives you evidence that multiple things could be correct, like, does that not mean that it is somewhat empty and putting on airs for the sake of putting on airs, even if it requires, like, intelligence to do it? I mean, I enjoyed it, but, like, I do think there's an argument for saying it's pretentious.
Right, which is why I was like, I mean, I noted that distinction on what pretension means, because I was like, I think I do sometimes use it incorrectly.
Yeah.
But also I was like, that's interesting to now having that definition of pretension. Do I think this is pretentious? And I'm like, a bit of yes, a bit of no.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I mean, like usually the way, with that definition of pretension, I tend to think of something that doesn't require any intelligence and is only somebody putting on airs undeservedly.
Sure.
And I mean, again, this does require intelligence on the part of the writer and intelligence and patience on the part of the reader. So from that perspective, it's not pretentious, but again, insofar as your hunt for meaning may be intentionally fruitless, like the point is that there is no point, I guess. But then if the point was that there is no point, then it's not empty, because the point of it was that there is no point.
But it's like, but doing it by forcing the reader to put in such amounts of effort. I mean,
you know what it feels like? It feels like in multiple fantasy books, the one that obviously comes to mind for me is Name of the Wind, but it's hardly the only one to do this, where you have the eccentric mentor that makes you do crazy tests and crazy exercises, and the wizard student or whoever doesn't know why they're doing this, but you have to trust the master and you just do it. You don't ask questions. You jump off the roof. And I feel like that's what it's like reading House of Leaves, where this is some wild wizard that's got some wacky ideas. And you're like, I think there's a lesson at the end of this, or they're crazy, but I'm going to do it and hope for the best.
I mean, yeah, I think fair. And, maybe it turns out that there really was no reason. The wizard just wanted to, like, make you do shit, because it would be funny. I mean, I don't know. I do think it's interesting, because at some point in the middle of the experience of reading this, I was like, who is this guy? Like, I'm going to look him up. And I do think reading about his background, I'm like, oh, this explains so much about what this book is. So if you guys don't know, Mark Danielewski was born in the 1970s to an avant-garde filmmaker. Grew up early on in New York City, moved around the world a lot for like film shoots, learned multiple languages, went to Yale for English literature, then studied Latin, I mean, I'm like, that tracks, right? With what this book is.
Yeah, a little bit like when you look up the Wikipedia page for Donna Tartt, you're like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
of course you wrote Secret History.
Like, I see where this came from. I think the thing that really blew my mind, and then I've learned since making the vlog video that even goes deeper than this, but his, and I told you this, Lana, because I was like, oh my God, I'm freaking out, is that he has a younger sister who's known as Poe. She's like was a musician, and she put out a song called Angry Johnny in 1995. This book came out in 2000. And Johnny is one of the characters in the book. And then in 2000, the same year House of Leaves came out, that apparently the whole record is kind of linked with House of Leaves, which I didn't realize. Specifically, there's a track called Dear Johnny, which references like the Blind Man and the House of Blue, like stuff that's very deep in there. Apparently there's also a track with her brother reading from House of Leaves, and they went on tour together. Like, it's so wild and meta.
I mean, yeah, it's not obviously for a wide audience.
No, but it's interesting. Okay, so I guess some things we could talk about. Number one, did you think it was scary?
There was one part of it, and it was fairly early on, and it made me hopeful because I was like, oh, if this is just like, here it begins, and from here on out, it's only going to get scarier. And then I was very disappointed because that was the only time I felt that way. But the very first time in the Navidson record that Navy himself goes kind of deep into this like unknown mysterious space, which is what this whole book is about, basically, that the house is bigger on the inside. So there's this cavernous dark black hole space that's in the house, and it keeps changing and expanding. So the first time that Navy goes in there and it's kind of documenting that experience of really realizing how deep it goes and how dark it is and how it has changed on him, so he's not sure he can get back. I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of scary. But then after that, honestly, every single time it had the potential to be a little bit suspenseful. In came Johnny with his story about some girl he wanted to bang or had banged or wasn't sure because he can't trust his mind. And I was like, who cares about this?
Oh man. I think I became more interested in Johnny's story because I was trying to understand what he was representationally in the book. And so that made him more interesting to me, and like his connection with his mom and stuff. But yeah, that's fair. I didn't think it was super scary either. There were a couple of moments that were a little creepy, and I do think the book is interesting in that it's got puts stuff in it that I think is intended to mess with the head of the reader. Like, I know I'm trying to remember, early in the book, there's a thing where Johnny has a footnote and he's like, this is how I was feeling. And if you want to know what it was like, do this. Look at this page and don't look away, and imagine that there's something like lurking next to you, but don't look at it. And like, I mean, it's like, guess like stuff where like, if you actually like do this as a thought experiment, you're going to freak yourself out. So there's stuff like that and these like weird meta elements that are slightly creepy, but no, I didn't think it was super scary either. I do think my experience was I got to a point partway through where because I was flipping back and forth with the footnotes and therefore feeling like I wasn't making a lot of typical forward progress, where I was like, oh my God, this book is a labyrinth. I'm lost in it. It's never going to end. There is no meaning. What is happening? So like, I had a little bit of that of it getting in my head, but otherwise, like, I just didn't find it that scary.
Yeah, well, also, I mean, I guess it also depends on the type of person you are, the type of reader you are.
Sure.
But I mean, for me personally, like for a book to scare me, I have to sort of reach that point as a reader where you kind of forget that you're reading and you're in the story now. And because of the very nature of it, that simply would never happen.
No.
It is impossible for that ever to happen when you're reading this book because it constantly interrupts itself to remind you that it is a book. Yeah. And if I don't think that's necessarily necessary for everyone to feel chilled by a book. They don't have to have this like feeling of forgetting you're reading and you're just in the story. From the reviews I saw from people who said that it did mess with their heads, they were like, well, you have to stop reading it as a book and just treat it as an experience. And I was like, okay, yeah, no. I
can't do that.
I think I'm just inherently too cynical a person to ever do anything like that. Like, I don't think hypnosis would ever work on me because I would just be too like eye rolling the entire time.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I was really treating this more like a puzzle that I was trying to figure out. And so the amount of work I did on this, like I haven't worked so hard at doing something since I was in grad school. It made my brain hurt.
Like the only thing that might have inspired me to actually do that kind of research or to
Hmm.
be keen on it or interested in it is if this book was still basically structured the way that it is,
Hmm.
but that at the core of it wasn't this made up Davidson record, but was something like the Blair Witch Project. Not necessarily that, because the story of Blair Witch Project doesn't lend itself to this, but something
Hmm.
like that where it is an actually existing piece of media that was maybe like this very little known snuff film or very little known art house film that
Yeah.
is now like people are hearing about it because it's in this book, but it does really exist. And so then you could actually have, while this is a fictionalized kind of thing where these
Hmm.
layers of researching it are fictional, there's still some core of truth that this really did exist. And then to
Yeah.
try to piece together which is true and which is speculation and where this speculation comes from, what truths that comes from. I would so do a deep dive. But
Yeah.
because I know that at the core of this is just a fiction invented by the author, then I have no interest in diving into that author's mind, because that's the only thing you're
Hmm.
going to be researching is what he thought was clever, what he thought he wanted to reference.
Yeah. I mean, I think what is interesting about it is if you want to like look at things, it does pull on real world stuff. And then I like there was an editor's note that actually referenced this later in the book, even though I had looked it up earlier. But there's this whole thing of like, Will Davidson won the Pulitzer Prize for this photograph. And like the description of that is based on a real photograph that somebody took in the 90s of a starving girl in the Sudan. And he ended up committing suicide because he felt guilty because he didn't intervene and do anything. And so like that's interesting. But then it's like the fact that they note it in the text, I'm like, so like this is a fabrication or is it not? Like, do we know there's evidence both ways? And that's like intentional, which is annoying. But also even things like they've got these like photographs of houses, and I figured out what at least one of them was, and it's an actual haunted house from Williamsburg. So it's like there's, I don't know, it's using a mix of real and made up stuff and then reference, and then it's like I don't know what any of it. Okay, this is the thing. I would like if I didn't know a name or didn't know a thing, I would Google it because I like random trivia and I was curious.
Tell
But
me you didn't Google every single name in that footnote that was just a list of names.
no,
Okay.
that I didn't.
Like, you're
But
insane.
no, I didn't. There are people who have though, and you can find them on the message boards. Like there's like a list that's all director. Anyway, I did not do that. However, like in the text, like there were things that I Googled, and it was interesting. Sometimes it would have stuff that I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like it would say, oh, someone met this person after World War II. And you look it up and I'm like, that person lived in the 1700s. They did not live in World War II. Like, why? What does this mean? I don't know. But it's interesting. And I'm still, even after reading it, like thinking of connections and being like, oh, but I don't know how meaningful it is.
Well, I was gonna say, so a thing that bothered me, not that I was doing any kind of deep diving, but nevertheless, every time that I spotted a typo, I hated that I couldn't ever be sure that is this a typo or is this intentionally misspelled?
Oh, it's
So that
intentional. It's all intentional.
I mean, but no book is that well edited. So like,
No, this look, because I looked it up, like I looked stuff up. Like there are two different points of view, for instance, who use the same phrase, tore her to Pisces instead of tore her to pieces, and it is intentional. And like there's like anyway, there's
no, I mean that was noted in the text. The thing you're talking about, there's a footnote
right,
addressing
yeah,
that.
but there's other ones too where they were purposefully spelled differently in the footnote versus the main text. Like,
But I'm not talking. But those are ones where I would notice where something like that
mhm,
happened. But I just mean like literally just like a random. Like
yeah,
it's not in a footnote. No one's calling it out. It's not like
mhm,
this word appears in two different places. It's just, for all intents and purposes, this just looks like a standard typo that you get in any fully edited book because it happens. But I'm
yeah,
like, is it supposed to mean something? And then like because of the weird formatting, then there was a page I remember distinctly where when one of the words, like it was half faded out,
mhm,
but it wasn't like a weirdly formatted page. It was just like a normal page. And I was like, that's the thing that in any normal book, I'd be like, yeah, well, sometimes that happens when the printer is like slightly out of ink and like there's just like
mhm,
one word that gets a little bit cut off. But I was like, but I don't know if that means something in this book, or if that's just, do I have to buy another copy and like find that one word, like, oh no, that was just okay. The printer ran out of ink on that one, but
Yeah. Well, and like, but people do, because this
which
is the level of like
insane.
the number of message words that exist on this stuff is a trip. I will admit to you, there's a chapter where I probably spent like an hour looking up the the Morse code alphabet. So that I could like figure out if there were like hidden, because there's like hidden messages too in like various places through the book. There's also stuff that I was like, I don't have time to do this, but I noticed other things and I've seen other people try to trace them. So it's just layers and layers of puzzles, which is, I mean it's impressive. And I don't think you have to do all of it necessarily, but like it is interesting.
Well, again, the thing about that too is like, if I'm going to be spending hours and hours researching something, I want at the end of that to feel like I can come away and feel like I am, to some small degree, little bit of an expert on an actual thing. But what you've come away from that being an expert on is Mr. Danielewski's mind, which I have no interest in being an expert on. I see no benefit to that.
I'm sure some people feel otherwise, but yeah, it's interesting. I do wish we got more answers. Like I do think for the amount of work that I put into it, I'm like, okay, things didn't have to be quite so open-ended.
Well, okay, and so another thing, okay, so I have 37 books on my October TBR, which I know for you and Mara and some others,
No,
that's
that's
not
a lot. I
necessarily.
mean, 37 is a lot.
Thank you.
So,
I
even
mean,
for
for
me.
me, it's especially a lot,
Yeah.
and it's because I mean, I couldn't choose, and so I just
Hmm.
put everything on it, and so a lot of it is all these books that I've just saved for October because in my mind they make good October reads. So
Hmm.
I've actually been just reading a bunch of I'm not an expert on thrillers. Like usually I read a thriller and I'm like, well, I'm not an expert in this genre. So like I'm coming into it sort of like somebody who's never read fantasy before. They won't call out something as being tropey because they don't know that that's tropey because they haven't read a bunch of fantasy. So like
Hmm.
I have like had a crash course in what thrillers have and don't have and what makes a good one. Because I've just like read so many back to back this month because I just saved them all for October. So I bring that
Hmm.
up just because like I wouldn't have necessarily, I don't know, noticed this or known that I would ask this, but for all of these thrillers, the thrillers that I like, I come away from it feeling like there was some kind of a point to it. I use air quotes because I mean the point to fiction. I mean, is there a point to fiction? But I mean, though the ones that in my opinion aren't very good, or the ones that I don't come away from feeling satisfied, I come away feeling like, okay, but like, what was the point of that? So I
Yeah.
don't. Maybe I was a little bit chilled at some point. Maybe along the way, like they did get me going. Oh no! But at the end of it, if I felt like, okay, well, what was the point of that? Then I don't like it. And so with this book, like I came away from it, and I just, it wasn't a sense of like, oh, I guess if I did a deep dive, I feel like even if I did a deep dive, I would still be like, okay, well, what was the point of that?
Yeah, I mean, like I do think there are themes he's exploring in it. I mean, I do think there's a lot of stuff about facing your trauma and fathers and sons and like generational issues and like like I guess this is a question too of what you think the labyrinth is or means, because I think what I ended up landing on is that it is mostly a reflection of the internal lives and relationships of the people inhabiting the house, and that
Well,
if it's
basically, it's a Rorschach house. It's like the ink blob that's shaped kind of
Oh, yeah,
weird,
yeah,
and then
yeah.
people look
Okay,
at it
okay,
and tell
okay.
you what they
Tell
see.
you what they see. Yes. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I guess I think that's the case, and I think there's quotes that indicate that maybe it's mostly made up of Karen's internal life, which I think is interesting. And that also to me explains why it goes away at the end, because they finally face their fears, face their inner demons, and like come away with things being better or different. Like, so I guess for me, like I see it as a metaphor or echo of like internal secrets and trauma and like fear and things that need to get faced primarily. But also this labyrinth that is linked with the myth of the Minotaur. And like, I don't know what it means exactly, but I have theories about who is supposed to be representing the characters from the myth of the Minotaur. So, like, I'm pretty sure Johnny is the Minotaur, and hmm, I have a lot of evidence. If you ever watch my vlog of the video, like I have all this evidence of why I think Johnny is the Minotaur. There's a dream he has at one point late in the book with this like frat boy wielding an axe trying to kill him, who I'm like, I think that's supposed to be Theseus, but then he turns into the faces of like women he's slept with. And I'm like, maybe they're supposed to be a representative of Ariadne or something, because she sort of like ultimately killed him or hurt him or something. I don't know. So I think there's something happening there.
If the house is the labyrinth, he's not even in it.
So I think the labyrinth also exists. So I think it's supposed to be like a multi-layered thing. Like I think part of it is that he is, and that his mom maybe, because like there's also things that compare the labyrinth to like the whale from Jonah and the whale story in the Bible. There's like all these references to that. And there's also like a character who goes into the labyrinth and gets seasick. And like, I'm pretty sure it's also supposed to be representative of the whale, and then his mom is in the Whale's Toe Institute, so she's in the belly of the whale. And anyway, so I think like there's a lot of layers of like representation he's trying to do here.
But so then you're saying that the Davidson record as a concept is the labyrinth in which he's the Minotaur, and then the labyrinth of the actual house is a whale, not the Minotaur's labyrinth. Except for that Johnny's mom is part of the whale thing and he's not.
Well, so I think Johnny's mom is connected to all of it, because like she, in some ways, or things she says, shows up through the whole book. So like, I think I don't really totally know, but I think there's something there, or that the labyrinth is like not just one labyrinth, that there's like the one in the Davidson record, and that one I think is really a reflection of like the internal lives of the people, or that's what it's intended to be written as, whether it's real or not. But that also there's some connection to the concept of that with Johnny and his mom and their messy family dynamics, but it's also using like this biblical imagery. So I don't know. Like,
okay, but so then also in this book we have them taking like samples of that, and then it's like predates the Earth, and then where does that fit into this theory?
Like I guess I don't know, because like I don't think it's real. Like I don't think the Davidson record is real. Like I think there's a lot of evidence that Zampano made it up
in the story.
Yeah, like I think that Zampano made it up, because there are like notes different places that suggest that he was considering other ways for the plot to go, like even on the first page, right? Like if you notice like the
I'm sure there's people that, well, like you told me, there's people that think that outside of the context of this book this is real, but I mean in the context of this book, like I think it would be really difficult to argue for the Davidson record being real, given how many times the book undermines that idea.
I mean, I think that's true. There are people who think it is, or who think that this as a thing that exists aside from being officially published is a real thing. Like there's people who think that's the case. But yeah, no. So like from within the world of the book, I think Zampano made it up.
Yeah.
But that in his narration of it, that's what the labyrinth is meant to represent.
But so then what did Zampano mean by the lab testing of the samples?
Just that it's like existed for all time, right? Like that some of it's alien, it predates, that like there's something about whatever this echo or view of eternity means that's existed forever. Well, and then there's the whole thing of like the very, very last page of the book. Did you notice this?
Did I don't know. I was excited to be done. I mean, there's the promo for the Familiar being out.
So the page right before that.
Not the self-promotion, got it.
No.
Yggdrasil?
Yeah. So I think that this is also what the labyrinth is supposed to be. In Norse cosmology, it's an immense sacred tree. So I think the rooms are like the branches, the spiral staircase is like the trunk. And so I think there's something about like the labyrinth is also some kind of a physical manifestation of this cosmological thing that's existed forever. And that's probably what the dating time is for.
Oh, that was going to say that was the only other part of the book that kind of almost was about to give me chills, because of the sort of cosmic horror of stepping into your house and actually being inside of like something older than the Earth.
Yeah.
And like, it's already scary to be in this dark black space that is going nowhere. But then when you put it in the context of outer space, which is so terrifyingly vast and ancient, that was like, oh, so being in there is even scarier, because you're like, it's like being in outer space, but in your own house.
Yeah.
But then, less scary when it's a symbol.
I think it's a symbol. Well, and the reason,
both.
and also then the reason that the aging would get older the farther in you go is like the rings of a tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That checks out.
Yeah. So that's kind of my
But again, okay, but at the same time though, like I come away from a story like that. Okay, so this is meant to represent like them dealing with their own trauma, and it's like eternal, and it's eternal in all the ways. Like if we go biblical, if we go Greek, if we go Norse, like it's eternal, and it's you dealing with your own psyche. But also like I still come away from it feeling like, what did I get out of that? Like, I guess they went on an emotional journey, but really the book is so focused on this like multi-layered academia treatment of it that like anytime it does actually talk about the emotional states of the characters, it borders on satire with the level of detail of like the 10 different books that are published on the one sentence that Karen said right before she looked at it gets to the point where I'm like, well, like, I'm not actually thinking about their emotional states. I'm thinking about how, oh, that's so funny how you're satirizing academia.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you're wrong. So I don't know. It's like, I have like very mixed feelings about it. I found it really interesting, and it is the sort of thing where part of me thinks in a year or two I might want to revisit it and see if I can draw more conclusions than I did the first time around, maybe, but I don't know.
Well, so the thing I enjoyed most about this is the parts where I felt that I was meant to interpret this as satire about academia. And for that reason, my favorite interpretation of this whole thing is because it's very overtly satirizing academia in those parts. But if the entire thing, the project of it, is to satirize the kind of academic who picks something apart and tries to find meaning in every little line, and I very much enjoy that interpretation of this whole thing, that was the point, in which case I applaud you, Danielewski.
I mean, and it wouldn't be the craziest thing if that were partly at least the case. I don't know. It's interesting. Well, apparently there's also a theory some people have. I don't agree with this, but like, you know how there's this whole story near the end of the woman who has the baby with the holes in its brain and it dies? So there are people who think that the baby is Johnny and none of this ever happened.
I mean, I kind of thought that it was about to tell me that the baby was Johnny, and then it didn't, and I was like, okay, guess not.
Yeah, well, it never tells you anything, but there's people who think that like that's what it is and that's what this whole thing means. But that's the whole point, is this book just like messes with you intentionally.
See, but again, like messes with you in like a, wow, that messed with me and now I feel so like chilled and that was an experience, or messes with you like, ha, you're dumb for following this up, which is my favorite interpretation.
Right. Or like messes with you like, ha, I'm gonna lead you down all these rabbit holes and like maybe you'll never find the real answer.
So many layers of meaning that you can just chase your tail for eternity. Best of luck to you.
I mean that, yeah. I feel like that's kind of part of it. I don't know. So it was an interesting experience. It was exhausting though too. This took me several days to read, where this was like almost all I did, and it was a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot. So, did you like it? I feel like that's a loaded question.
I mean, did you like it? You spent a lot more time with it than I did.
I don't know. Yes and no. Sometimes. Yeah, I did. Like, there were things I like about it, and then there were times that it was a lot and boring sometimes and repetitive, and I was like, why am I doing this? But then sometimes it was satisfying. I don't know. I mean,
I ended up how out there it is and its commitment to being unapologetically this monstrosity. And again, the no small amount of time and effort that necessarily goes into something like this. So from that standpoint, I can't help but sort of be in awe. But then also I feel like, dude, what a waste of your time. What a waste of everyone else's time. Like, are you punishing us because we're going to spend 10 years trying to figure out something that it took you 10 years to write, and all of us have lost 10 years of our lives? Like, why?
Yeah, I mean, I think he Like, but I think that's what he's into, because then he went on to do another similar project. Like, The Familiars apparently was originally supposed to be 27 volumes, and I think he stopped after like 5 or 6 because not enough people were buying the books, and the publisher was like,
I mean, at least with House of Leaves, you know that when it's over, you may be just as confused when you're done as you were when you started, but that's it.
You did it.
Unless
You
you
made
go
it.
like to the message boards and try to figure all this out.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
This is one
Well,
and done.
yeah. Well, and I think what's funny too is in the book itself, it has these meta moments where it's like, after reading it, some people like were just a little affected and left it behind and went on about their lives, but other people got deeper and deeper into it and had all of these, and sometimes had mental breaks. It even resulted in 3 suicides. Like, it like literally says this in the text. So I'm like, okay.
Which I almost feel like it's like egging on the person that thinks that they're smarter for doing the deep dive, as
I mean, I
opposed
think
to us,
it totally
normies
is.
who are just like, whatever. And you're
Yeah.
like, you're not crazy enough to really see the meaning. And I'm like, I am not. You're correct about that.
I mean, I think it kind of is, honestly. Like, it's sort of like who it's written for, ultimately, in some ways. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So, if that sounds interesting to you, people, try it. If it doesn't, watch my vlog and you'll like get a really good idea of what the
honestly,
experience is
okay,
like.
my favorite part of this whole book, and the part at which I felt the most seen, was in the made-up quotes from Stephen King and his reaction to this. I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. Sir, that's my reaction to this.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, this book is a trip. Yeah, I think that's I don't know if you have any final thoughts. I know we're going to move into On My Radar, but House of Leaves, guys.
I can guarantee you've never read anything like it.
True. Very true. It is. I mean, and maybe that's part of why he did it, is like some people consider it a piece of literature, like.
Okay, but that too, the people who are fans of it saying, well, this is the future of literature, and I'm like, God, I hope not.
Oh no.
Absolutely
I don't
not.
No, I mean, I don't think so. I do think it's interesting as like a literary piece, like an example of one way to do, like, I think I don't think this is going to become wide, though. No. All right, guys. Well, with that said, we are going to move on to On My Radar, where I'm going to share recent and upcoming book releases in sci-fi, fantasy, and romance that I'm excited about. The books for today's episode will be released between October 26th and November 8th, 2021. October 26th, I've got 2 books for you. We've got all the holiday romances coming out, so that's what I'm excited for. Liana, it's not her thing, but that's fine. I like them. We've got Just for the Holidays by Adriana Herrera, who I love. This one is about a casting director and an actor being snowed in together at Christmas. It's a Harlequin romance. Then we've got Christmas in Rose Bend by Naima Simone. I'm reading this one right now, actually. It's pretty fun. Nessa is a grieving ER nurse reeling from her mother's deathbed confession and spending the holidays with her teen half-sister, who she's now a guardian for, in a small town teeming with the Christmas cheer she usually avoids. But then she meets the innkeeper's ruggedly sexy son with his big, boisterous family. And, it's like a Hallmark thing, except we have like a ER nurse who's like a Black woman with a cool undercut hairstyle as our heroine, so that's fun. I like it. Like, it's like if you're looking for a little more diversity in your holiday romance, it might be one to check out. Then November 2nd, there are 2 books coming out. Gilded by Marissa Meyer. She's returning to doing fairy tale retellings, which I'm excited for. This is a haunting retelling of Rumpelstiltskin. Looking forward to that. And then also November 2nd, we've got A Marvelous Light by Freya Marsky. This is pitched as Red, White, and Royal Blue meets Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell in a debut novel. A Marvelous Light features an Edwardian England full of magic, contracts, and conspiracies. And I saw somebody put a quote on this saying it's like if you ever wanted Downton Abbey to be darker with magic. So I'm here for it. I think it sounds fun. So yeah, Liana, I don't know if you have anything to add. If not, that's cool. All right. That is it. Thank you all for joining us for this discussion of House of Leaves. Again, this has been Chapter 3 Podcast, and we are your hosts, Bethany and Leanna. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Chapter 3 Podcast, and you can also find us on YouTube, and those links will be in the description if you want to check them out. The next episode is going to be available in 2 weeks, and we are going to be back with some special guests to talk about Dune, the book and the movie. So if you want to read along or see the movie, we're super excited, so it's going to be fun. So come back in 2 weeks for that. This episode's bonus content will be available to patrons in the next few days. Thanks for listening.